Hello, everyone, and good evening. I hope you've had a lovely day, and I hope you're ready to continue reading from A Nest for Celeste, right? A story about art, inspiration, and the meaning of home. Written and illustrated by Henry Cole and published by Catherine Tagan Books, an imprint of HarperCollins publisher. Okay, so we'll continue where we left off in chapter 15, where our friend Joseph had just been really badly injured, right? He'd been maimed, he'd been hit by a bullet right near his ear, and right now he's resting. Okay, so let's see what happens in chapter 15, the ivory build. Joseph hung his shirt on the door peg with Celeste nestled in the pocket, then collapsed on his cot, exhausted. Celeste could tell his head was throbbing, but the men had done a good job of cleaning and dressing the wound. She waited for his breathing to steady and slow, and finally he was asleep. She watched the black and white bird, the woodpecker. It scooted awkwardly around the room. Joseph had left it some grubs to eat, but the bird ignored them. It cried pathetically most of the night, hopelessly hammered at anything wooden, reducing one of the chair legs to splinters. The next morning, Celeste saw it lying under the window listlessly. It seemed to have no flight left in it. Audubon took the bird and made sketches of it, but the drawings looked dull and lifeless, much like the woodpecker. Joseph took the bird outside to the garden, hoping that seeing the sky and trees would help. He laid the woodpecker under one of the magnolias, but it only stretched its neck out in the grass and stared up blankly. It again refused the grubs and worms that Joseph brought it. Celeste tried squeaking out encouragement from Joseph's pocket, but the woodpecker never responded. Later that evening, Celeste was perched in Joseph's pocket, watching him sketch. The setting sun was streaming in through the bedroom window. They heard Audubon call out, "Joseph, fetch me some more pins." Dutifully, Joseph searched a wardrobe drawer for the pins. As they entered Audubon's room, Celeste chittered in disbelief, then squeaked in horror. Audubon was carefully lifting the drooped and lifeless body of the ivory-billed woodpecker out of the canvas saddlebag. Its eyes were glazed over and cloudy. Its head hung down, jiggling like a knot at the end of a loose rope. The two wings, one broken and twisted, flopped forward and back as Audubon tried positioning the bird against a wooden board. Celeste could see that a small, dark purple streak of blood had oozed from the corner of its long, curved beak. Celeste witnessed a change in Joseph's appearance. His eyes were somber. His voice quivered a bit, stumbling for words. This doesn't seem right." "What doesn't?" "I don't know. The way we are doing this. The paintings. What about them?" Celeste noticed Joseph's face getting red, and he was flustered as he spoke. "You are looking to capture its life on paper, but by killing it first? By pinning it to a board?" "I am painting their portraits. This is how they sit for me." It was so majestic up in that enormous cypress tree. "There are plenty more woodpeckers where this one came from," Audubon retorted. "There were possibly dozens in the woods where I took this one. One bird less won't make any difference." "Maybe we could," Joseph offered. "What?" Audubon shot back. "Do you want to hold the bird for me while it's still alive and have its bill sliced through your hand?" "Perhaps a cage?" "No, a caged bird will sit like a caged bird. I want my specimens posed like I want to paint them." wings outstretched, as if they were alive. But to kill them in order to make them look alive. Joseph shook his head. Audubon glared at the boy, his eyes dark and angry. For a moment, Celeste was afraid for Joseph, but Audubon just lowered his voice and held out his hand. The pins, Joseph. Joseph handed the packet of pins to Audubon, who continued, Your duty is to master the techniques of watercolor botanicals, not to question my handling of the bird specimens. I am preserving their beauty forever. If I could paint their portraits as well another way, I would. Now go. Joseph's face was red, his mouth rigid. He turned and strode down the hallway, leaving Audubon to sketch the pinned and trussed ivory bill woodpecker. He paused, thinking, a landscape with no woodpeckers? His life had seen lonely moments, and probably would again, but he couldn't imagine the loneliness of being the last of his own kind on earth. He thought about the ivory-billed. There were certainly other woodpeckers all along the river valley, but what if there was only one more? How would it spend the rest of its days? On an endless and futile search up and down the valley, looking to find another ivory-billed woodpecker? As if sensing just Joseph's melancholy thoughts, Celeste burrowed down in the shirt pocket. Chapter 16. And there we see Joseph looking out the window, and Mr. Audubon is painting that pinned up bird. Now, Audubon is a true, real character. This is something that this painter actually did, and his work is actually very famous. It's even in the Asheville Art Museum right now. Work by James, is it James or John? I know it's J. Audubon. I'll have to check that for us. Chapter 16, Cornelius. Another afternoon, another lesson. Audubon's hand glided across a sheet of paper, guiding a stick of charcoal. Observe, he commanded. The charcoal scratches eventually formed the outline of a crested head, a beak, an opposed body, and wings of the ivory build. Joseph sighed, trying to muster up interest in the lesson. To him, trying to listen to Audubon's instructions sometimes felt like pulling nails out of a plank. Instead of watching the charcoal, he stared out the window. He was wishing both he and Celeste were out exploring the woods around the plantation, looking for plant specimens. Celeste's nose twitched as she watched from her pocket perch. The odor of putrefying flesh had begun to hang closely in the hot room, and flies hovered constantly around the bird. So we've heard hovered before, right? That was one of our vocabulary words, actually, where it's flying or floating in air in mid-place. So there's a bunch of flies hovering, flying around the bird. And there's the odor, the smell of putrefying flesh. That means like rotting flesh, like it's gone bad, it's spoiled meat, right? So putrefying flesh, right? So this bird, my nose is itching just thinking about it. This bird is starting to go bad, right? It's starting to rot because it's dead and it's hung up. So there's flies and a bad smell in the room. They heard the shout below the bedroom window. Two young boys, the sons of one of the farmhands, were outside. The older one clutched something carefully to its chest. "Mr. Joseph, we got something for you," he cried, out with excitement. He cautiously revealed a tiny portion of a feathered body. "It's a bird. Everybody says you want to get birds. Well, we got one for you." Joseph raced outside and gingerly pulled back more of the old shirt. He saw a yellow bill and a soft, creamy, white breast feathers spotted with dark brown. A wood thrush, he murmured. Beautiful. Thanks, boys. We found him in the lower barn. He must have flown in and couldn't get back out. It wasn't easy catching him. He was scared. It was easy, the young boy said. Well, nice job, boys. This thrush will make for a beautiful painting. He gave the boys a coin from his pocket and they ran off. The little wooden cage soon had a new occupant, the panicky thrush, which probably, that's me, woo. The panicky thrush, which probably had never been enclosed in anything smaller than the lower barn, now beat its wings against the twig bars, fluttering nervously about the cage. Thankfully, as night fell, he became quiet. The next morning, after Joseph had gone outside to wash, Celeste scrambled down the shirt to the floor and carefully clawed her way up to the brocaded drape and leaped to the tabletop. "Hello," she said to the thrush. "Hello," the thrush called back. His voice was low and silvery. "May I introduce myself?" began Celeste. "My name is Celeste, and I live in this house." "I'm pleased to meet you," replied the thrush. "My friends call me Cornelius. I'd be honored if you did the same." "Thank you. Pleased to meet you, Cornelius. I did live in the woods near here. I can't tell you how horrible it is to be trapped inside this cage after a lifetime of flying free. How good are you with escape plans, Celeste? I have worn myself silly trying to fly in between the bars of this cage and lost some feathers in the process, as you can see." He looked up. "What about that little door?" Cornelius suggested. "Can you climb up there and unlatch it?" Celeste squinted up at the cage door. She said. "Just maybe." She clawed up one of the bars of the cage to the latch. She tried undoing the wire clasp, but it was tightly twisted. "I might have better luck just chewing through the bars," Celeste said. "It would take me a few days to make a hole big enough for you to squeeze through, but I'm sure I could do it." Cornelius looked at her. "How did you come to live here?" he asked. Celeste scampered down the side of the cage. No one had ever asked her that. She hadn't thought about her journey to the house at Oakley Plantation in a long time. She looked at Cornelius. His eyes were clear and thoughtful. Celeste could see that even though trapped in a cage, Cornelius was interested in his new friend. "Well," she began, "I guess you could say I was rescued." "Rescued from what?" Celeste thought back. There were details of her childhood she could barely recall. She remembered a nest made of grasses and a tangle of timothy hay and wildflowers. She remembered 3 brothers and a sister, and a doting mother and father. After a moment, Celeste spoke. "My very first memory is of my mother. Francis, Silas, Bo, Louisa," she would say, nudging my brothers and sisters. "Let Celeste in," and I would wiggle in and squirm until I had a spot in my mother's soft, warm tummy to nurse. I remember all of us rolling and tumbling around our nest, a cozy dome of grass. There was a forest of grasses and weed stalks all around outside, and we'd explore it together. That's when I found I could twist and weave blades of grass together. My mother showed me how. Then, one afternoon, I was gathering grasses. I shouldn't have been out of the nest, where the rest of my family was napping. It was a hot day. I heard human voices off in the field. They were singing. The voices got closer, and I heard another strange swooshing sound. As I raced back towards the nest, the tall, shady grasses were suddenly cut clean to the ground. There was this horrible glare and the heat of sunlight everywhere. Our home had been sliced open by a long curved blade. I saw the blade. It glinted in the sun and then swept back, slicing through the grasses over and over. Cornelius hopped closer to the edge of the cage. What happened then? Well, I don't remember much after that. Just lots of squeals and cries for help and frantic scrambling for safety. But after the humans had passed on, I was the only one left alive. I was wounded. I had been stepped on by one of the humans. But how did you end up here in this house? Nighttime came. I was still lying there in the drying hay. I remembered it smelled so sweet. I was waiting to die, really. I was so weak. I heard a rustling, and a groundhog lumbered up. I was too hurt and tired to say or do anything, but the groundhog, his name was Ellis. He carried me on his back and brought me here to the house. He lived in a tunnel under the stone foundation. He gathered fresh grasses and things to nibble on until I got better. I learned how to live in the big house from 2 rats. They showed me how to find food. Without my family, there didn't seem to be any reason to live in the fields again. So I decided to stay here for a while. That was many months ago. I never left. What happened to Ellis? Cornelius asked. I'm not sure. One day I heard shots from outside, and I never saw him again. I don't know if he was hurt or just chased away. He was a good friend. It is tough being an animal surrounded by humans, my goodness. She paused for a moment, thinking. She hadn't ever permitted herself to bring up memories of that day. It felt good to tell Cornelius. Thanks for listening, she said. I didn't mean to go on and on. My plan now is to get you out of this cage. But in the meantime, can I get you anything? Something special that you like to eat, perhaps? Cornelius replied excitedly. Something like dogwood berries? The dogwood berries are beginning to ripen, and I haven't had one since last fall. I noticed a dogwood tree in the yard, just next to this house, with green and red berries all over it. Dogwood berries would be lovely. That should be simple enough, said Celeste. You could do that? I'll see what I can do. I can try finding some once it gets a little darker outside. Wonderful. Being in this cage is a nightmare. You've given me, well, a glimmer of hope. The wood thrush then lifted his head and let loose a startlingly clear warble that resonated through the room. So the bird is singing, right? The beauty of it made Celeste's chest give a tiny heave, and she felt a pang and an ache so intense that her heart skipped and trembled. She clutched at it with her paw. The lilting bird song ended, and the room was still. I don't know which I like better, Celeste whispered, your beautiful song or just after. The thrush smiled. Do that for Joseph, Celeste stated firmly. Sing just like that. Promise me. And here's our friend Cornelius sitting in his cage. And I guess he's singing, right? Cornelius shrugged his wings, then nodded. And that's where we're stopping for tonight, my friends. Cornelius is in his cage. Celeste has made a promise to get him some dogwood berries. And we'll have to see what happens next in chapter 17, Outside. All right, my friends, have a lovely rest of your night. I look so forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.